Hi, my name's John Mortimer, and I'm going to talk about transformation and reform in the public sector. The reason I'm doing this is that I find that this is a really important topic because there isn't really that much discussion about what exactly it is. We just sort of go and do things in organizations to help make them change. But what is transformation and reform? What exactly is it? It's not simply about doing stuff in an organization. I'm going to go through with you the Three Horizons model, which will provide a very useful framing to look at the reasons why reform is so difficult, what we can do about it, and how we can develop a method for successfully sustaining and growing real change in the public sector. And I have some further materials and case studies in the description below. Our management world is defined by the way that we think about work. It's about reducing cost. It's about getting the right people in the right place. It's about being flexible. It's about managing demand, risk, improving the numbers. We have to keep on top of society and what the needs are today and how that will change tomorrow. What we tend to do today to do this is we tend to reduce all of these different drivers and characteristics down to their individual parts. And we very often create separate change initiatives. Digital, IT, process change, people change, structural change. This often creates silos of change, which are often uncoordinated and repeated over the years. Sometimes this change is simply a reaction to one aspect of what we want to do, like cutting costs. What we do know is that this piecemeal approach is not suited to how an organization really works. And very often this change will actually make things in a different part of the organization worse. What can take us forward is to do the opposite of what we have been doing. Instead of looking at each part separately, we can stand back and look at the whole of what's going on, looking at this whole complexity as a system in itself. And in simplistic terms, and if you don't have enough time to see the whole video, I'm just going to sort of summarize the problem here in the main message, which is if we have our current organization here, its way of working, its people, its thinking, its rules and procedures, if we change things in an organization, we very often simply place new ways of working on top of what we already do. The current system reacts negatively to this change. It sends out antibodies. Any innovation in this change simply gets swallowed up in the current ways of thinking and working, so that the real change gets watered down, often sinking into oblivion, leaving the original organization there relatively untouched. So what we're going to do now is to see why this happens and how to avoid it. We start by asking ourselves, what is the dominant pattern or focus in an organization at a particular time? The y-axis. Let's start with where we are now and project that forward, the x-axis. We'll look at what Horizon 1 is, business as usual. This is how we work today. It's static, but this way of working erodes over time because of changes and pressures that open up, that force an organization to change. No organization remains static. Now let's put in Horizon 3. This is our organization in place in the future. It doesn't exist yet, and we often don't know what the detail is in there, and it emerges over time. Horizon 2 is the area of change and transformation. It's where the current pattern of Horizon 1 gives way, and we begin to move to a future organization. Horizon 2 enables the shift. It's entrepreneurial, it's innovative. Instead of pushing H3 onto H1 and expecting H1 to change, we consciously separate the two from each other and allow H3 to emerge. Each horizon can be seen as three different qualities that, if we don't want to knee-jerk into the future, all three should be understood and designed for in the leadership of the organization. There comes a point where we begin the transformation from H1 to H3, and we can ask these questions at that point. What would be true and what would need to occur to uncover H3? And what would we need to do to Horizon 1 to move to Horizon 3? These questions are a provocation to us to begin that move. So with Horizon 2, we need to allow for experimentation and design to emerge. To successfully move with H2, we learn, we develop new ideas. We have to be able to disconnect from our current ways of working. If we don't, then whatever we try and come up with will simply be absorbed into the current Horizon 1 constraints and thinking. Horizon 2 is not about doing what we do better. It's about doing different things. It's about transformation. It's about seeing our organization through a new lens rather than the current paradigm. More importantly, H2 is about the process of how we take ourselves through this. By what path do we move to the future state? By what method? The Three Horizons concept is a useful way to highlight systemic change. And in helping us to recognize the difficulties of the so many failures that we've had in change and reforming the public sector over the past decades. And I want to use a metaphor to try and explain this in a very easy way. If we had a small car and we wanted to fly, one way we could do this is to take the car and begin to modify it, adding wings, making the engine lighter, modifying most of the car over time. Perhaps after lots of time and effort, we might just come up with something that might leave the ground, but it will never fly. And the modification time would be huge. Alternatively, we could simply start by designing a small airplane from scratch. This is far easier. This would take less time and effort and result in a machine that would fly well. Modifying the car to make a plane is a bit like taking Horizon 1 and trying to make that into Horizon 3. Hoping to create Horizon 3 from Horizon 1 is what we've been doing in the public sector for decades. This is the change that is like walking in treacle, pushing things to make things happen, and then realizing that not much has actually improved. Alternatively, starting with a new design for a plane is like focusing on H3 and then applying a method of change focused on new principles that are separate from H1. This is very different, as we don't bring with us all the restrictions and thinking from H1. We then have the opportunity to undertake transformation, moving from one state to the next. And that's what reform is really all about. One useful and successful method to do H2 is when we get a small group of people to work together, disconnected from H1, with permission to experiment, focused on the missions of H3. They're there to test and to learn from those tests. We might call this an innovation team, but it's much more than that, is that it links all the parts of the organization together that want to move forward. It must be rooted in reality. The team's primary activity is to learn what's possible and practical, and that learning has to be shared with those that lead into H3. The approach is known in the private sector and systemic change. Only by bringing in this thinking to the public sector might we have the opportunity to highlight how reform might happen. In this example in health, this is how they worked in Horizon 2. We got some frontline people in a room and they experimented with different ways that they could help people with their health needs. After some weeks, they had worked with 35 people in need. They learned new approaches, some of which were very different to what they'd ever experienced before. They learned not what was wrong with the people, but what really mattered to people about and how best to help them. They moved from simply learning to creating a prototype new way of working. Based on this prototype, this new way of working, with helping people in the community, they managed to achieve far more than they could before. And that was at 14% less cost and resources, and face-to-face time increased by 15%. Administration was slashed, all by being separate from Horizon 1. In summary, the Horizon model points to the fact that we need well-defined and proven approaches to change. And that change is a competence that is not simply another branch of what managers do. It's a specialized and expert discipline that needs a framework and a method. I hope this video helps to introduce systemic transformation and reform. There is, of course, much more to this. This is just a very brief introduction. If you would like to explore more, Please get in touch, and thanks for watching.